Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to take a list of books that I consider to be Booktube darlings, meaning they're extremely popular and highly recommended across Booktube and have been for years, and then I wanted to do a tier ranking of them. I always, when I do tier rankings, have at least 5 tiers, and I like to require myself to put things in every single tier, otherwise what's the point? Because I know sometimes people will have tiers that they're like, oh, nothing even goes in the bottom. I'm like, then don't have a bottom tier. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked immediately. The point is, I wanted to force myself to utilize every single tier, and I like to put an amount that I have to place within each tier. So for the bottom tier, I had to have at least 3, and usually when I have these sort of parameters around tier rankings, I tend to find these to be challenging, and in this instance, it wasn't at all. I definitely had some that I was thinking, yeah, I don't line up with the rest of Booktube on these. And the point of this is not to in any way try to imply that I have better taste than anybody else or that the rest of Booktube has bad taste, because there's plenty that I'm also 100% in agreement are fantastic. Rather, the point of this is just that I think so many people so often have at some point experienced feeling like you're on the outside looking in and wondering what all of the excitement is about. And then also simultaneously, there are times where we fit in 100% with the rest of the crowd, it feels. So I just wanted to, even if you feel completely different about the individual books or series and my placements of them, I did still think it would be fun to go through and kind of represent that general feeling of sometimes we're with the crowd and sometimes we're not. I, as always, like to start my tier rankings in the middle tier and then work my way to the extremes, so that's what we're going to be doing. And starting with the middle tier, oh man, I feel like already this is maybe a controversial one, and that would be The Grace of Kings. I do want to make clear, I've only read the first book in this series, and I do plan to continue on, and I have seen a lot of people say that the first book, in their opinion, is the weakest. So I think it's possible that I actually maybe don't have that unpopular of opinion. It's just that I haven't continued on yet. My fear, though, is that I'm not going to end up loving the rest of the series as much as the people who do feel that way about book 1 and then continue on and love it. Purely because of how it's written, it does tend to get to be pretty bird's eye for a number of parts of the series, or excuse me, the first book. I just said I haven't read the rest of the series. But it does have moments where it feels like there's a detachment and that you're being told the story from this narrator. It's the general feeling. It's not a formal, I'm breaking the fourth wall and talking to you, the reader, by any means. But I really like character-driven stories. I really like feeling like I'm with characters. And when you have enormous time skips, or when you're almost utilizing a perspective that feels as though it's coming from the gods themselves, then I start to feel like I'm being told this epic tale, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I want to feel like I am alongside the characters throughout the epic tale, as opposed to being told about it. It depends, of course, because I do feel like the Green Rider, that book, has a little bit of a feeling of that sort of, you're being told this tale sitting around a fire, and it's this epic journey of good versus evil. But I think it just depends on the book and the story, and in this one, I found some of my favorite moments were when we sort of paused and we did zero in. Anyway, this isn't a book review for The Grace of Kings. The point is, I put it in the middle tier. We will see. Perhaps if I continue on with the rest of the series, I will feel different. After that, we have The Will of the Many. This one, I feel like everybody, it's not just that they like it, it's that they love it, and they act like it's the greatest thing to come along and grace fantasy in years. And I'm always like, I mean, it was fine, you know? It's not the most unique or original story, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. A lot of stories are sort of pulling from things we've seen before. I think for me, what sort of took this from me feeling the same as a lot of other people is that the unique elements to this, which is the will, the part that I feel is sort of at the forefront within the very title of the story, and also the way in which people talk about it. I was really fascinated by that concept, but I don't feel it was really as much of the center of attention as I was hoping it would be. And the rest of it was sort of a familiar layout, I'll say, to some other stories that I have read. And as a result, I was like, I mean, it feels kind of like a lot of other stuff. Why are we acting like it's the most mind-blowing thing to come? I think what this book did well is that it was sort of like a return to a certain kind of fantasy and science fiction that a lot of people like. Plus, it does feel like a good hybrid of science fiction and fantasy. So I think that where we've had a lot of cozy fantasy coming about, we've had a lot of standalones, we've had a lot of fantasy romance that has been popular. This one, again, to repeat myself, feels like a return. And I think for a lot of people, they've been craving that. Also, I don't want to try to take away the fact that plenty of people just genuinely really enjoyed this story. I think I was just hoping that the will and that concept would be fleshed out a lot more and play a much bigger role in the first book, and it did not. However, I do hope to keep going with this series, and this could, similar to Grace of Kings, be a situation where the first book is sort of just middle of the road, but then the rest of the series improves, in my opinion. So we'll find out when I read on. Next up is a book that, depending on the books that it's up against, sometimes it ends up higher, sometimes it ends up in this middle tier, and that would be Babel. If you've heard me talk about Babel before, I'm not going to be saying anything particularly new from what I've said in the past. I think that this book had absolutely amazing, really impactful themes, and I applaud R.F. Kuang for approaching those things and for really not only shedding a light on this concept, which a lot of the themes have to do with culpability, how much you play a role in the things going on in the rest of the world, how much you have a personal responsibility to say something or do something when you are either directly or indirectly benefiting from the suffering of others. And I feel that she did not in any way shy away from showing not only what that does to a person, but if you do choose to stand up and say something, what it can cost. So I appreciate all of those things. I just think that we didn't quite have enough time, and I actually would go as far as to say enough perspectives to really show those themes as well as I think they could have been shown. I think a standalone maybe was not, in my opinion, for my taste of what I wanted out of something so important, I think I would have wanted more time with it. So I don't think a standalone really did enough. And I think I just really like these themes, so I just wanted more of them. And it's the con for a lot of standalones is if you're going to go into some of those deeper, heavier places, I think sometimes you just need more time to develop them. Next up would be a book that this might be kind of surprising that this is here, because I do like it more than the other ones I have mentioned, and that would be The Tainted Cup. I wanted to put this in the second tier, but similar to what I was saying at the beginning of the video, where I try to have certain restrictions, the second tier already had quite a few books in it, and I just feel like this book isn't quite maybe standing out. I don't know, I'm looking at the ones I have in the second tier, and I'm thinking maybe this belongs in the second tier also. But I'm just going to keep it here for now and just know that there's a little bit of an asterisk, and I'm thinking maybe this actually belongs in tier 2. I think that for me, this one, the creativity of the world is fantastic, and unlike what I was saying with The Will of the Many, I was surprised just how in-depth we went with the world building when the marketing made it seem like it was going to be more contained. I could see this being a con for some people where they're thinking it is going to be more of a murder mystery, and that is true, but then maybe they're almost finding the level of world building to be slightly off-putting because they were wanting something cozier or something a little more accessible. But I quite enjoyed the in-depth nature of the world building. I think the reason I have it in this third tier, and that was my first instinct to put it here instead of the second, is that I was hoping that we would get to know the characters a little bit better over the course of the investigation that's playing out. But because of the fact that the focus of the plot is the investigation, there was a number of times where the plot actually moved very quickly, and I was like, oh, hold on, I want to know what everybody's thoughts and feelings are right now. So that's not really probably the best wish for a story where the plot is moving in an organic way, because then what I wanted from it would have detracted from what I feel was probably exciting pacing. So this is why I'm kind of unsure about where I actually want this, but I do look forward to the sequel, and I'm hopeful that we're going to get a lot more with the world building in the sequel as we did with the first one. Okay, moving outside of the middle tier and getting to some of the extremes. Well, actually, they're not that extreme yet, but getting to more positive and negative and a little bit less of the neutral to slightly positive, I would say, or neutral to slightly negative feelings. I don't know why I'm elaborating on what the middle tier is. You all understand. Okay, fourth tier. We'll start with some negatives here. So, which one do I start with? We'll start with Wheel of Time. A lot of people on Booktube love Wheel of Time. A lot of other people don't like it at all. So this is one of those Booktube darlings, but it depends. Because I do feel that people that love this series also are, and this is why I actually do really quite like a lot of elements of the Wheel of Time fandom, is there is such an awareness of the things that a lot of people point to for why they don't love the series, even if those things either aren't a big deal to you or they don't bother you at all, or maybe they're even positives for you, there isn't this immediate dismissal or putting down of the people that don't enjoy it. Because there are other fandoms where if somebody has anything critical to say, it immediately turns into personal attacks on the individual. This is not, I don't need to get into the fandom itself. My point though is all the things I could point to for why the series, which I did read 4 of, why the series didn't work for me, I don't feel like it's anything different than what a lot of other people, even fans of the series, would be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I totally understand. Part of it is just, I find pretty much none of the characters to be particularly likable, and I also feel like it's such a plot-heavy story and world-building heavy story, and as I've already stated, I am more of a character-driven reader if I'm going to be reading that many books. I think I want to like my characters a little bit more, and if I don't really like them, then there's not a whole lot for me to want to continue on for it. That's not always the case. Some things can be extremely thematically driven, or sometimes the worlds are just so fascinating that I'm like, I don't even care about the characters. I'm just here for the world itself. But I don't think Wheel of Time falls into that category, unfortunately. I'll go ahead and stay in this tier and just go through all 4 of these, and then we'll go up to the second tier. So we also have, Jade City. I always say, this one was so perfect for me on paper. The idea of it being a slightly different type of setting than what we typically get in fantasy, the idea of this sort of crime family dynamic, I really enjoyed the idea of that. I liked the idea of they have their hands in everything from the economy to international politics to the politicians' pockets. Like, they're involved in everything, and then they're also involved in regular citizens' lives. And then there's potentially a rival gang, we'll call it, that they're up against. All of this sounded fantastic to me. I was so on board, and I just was not... I didn't care about any of the characters. They kind of annoyed me. I still to this day don't understand the love for Hilo. But to be honest, I don't get the love for anybody. Hilo's just the one that people, I feel like they look at Hilo and they're like, oh my god. I don't know why I'm giving people that voice. That's not what anybody sounds like. Some people really like Hilo, and I'm like, I don't get it. And some people really like Shay, and I'm like, eh. And then the other one, Lon, it's remarkable to me that I remember their names, but because I can't remember names of characters in books that I like, and for some reason these characters, so I guess maybe they stand out, but for me, not for the right reasons. But Lon stood out to me for being like painfully bland. I was so shocked that I'm like, this guy is the one that's supposed to, like rise up to the occasion, but he's dull. I wasn't a fan of any. It's like all the personality went to Hilo, but all the worst parts about having a personality went to Hilo. And then Shay was just there, and I'm like, ugh. Anyway, they're fine. The characters are fine. I didn't really like them very much, if that wasn't evident. Anyway, I am sad though, because I really liked Untethered Sky by Fonda Lee, so I would absolutely continue to read other things by this author. Jade City was just not the story for me. Dowry of Blood, this was also a story that, as is the whole point of this video, lots of people love it, and I didn't. So Dowry of Blood is one, though, that I absolutely can see why it's so meaningful to so many people, because it really locks you, the reader, into the headspace of what it's like to be an individual who is essentially trapped within an abusive relationship where there is a huge power dynamic between the abuser and the person that they are abusing. And I can completely understand and see why that is so significant and so meaningful to so many people. I just didn't necessarily care for the writing style, even though I think it was really artistic, and I will always appreciate when authors take a chance with artistic writing styles. Last for this tier, we have Iron Gold, and interestingly enough, I have Red Rising in the second tier. I think so many people would reverse these. So to me, Iron Gold, I can't really get into specifics without spoiling things. I just have a lot of things that I'm very picky about when it comes to series continuations. And I found that Iron Gold did a lot of the things that irritate me with continuations. And that's really the main reason that it's here. I actually think that Pierce Brown, as a writer, I actually liked a lot of the differences between Iron Gold and the original trilogy. I liked that it opened up and you got more perspectives. I just didn't care for some of the decisions that he made within Iron Gold. And with that being said, we'll go on up to the second tier. So first up, I might as well just talk about Red Rising. Red Rising had its time in the sun, and now it feels like it has its time in the shade. I guess. I don't know how else to put it. But it feels like there's always a push and pull where it goes through phases where people are like, oh my gosh, it's so action-packed and it's so cool and it's about rising up. And then it will have backlash. Not backlash, that's probably too dramatic of a way to put it, but it will have people being like, this kind of sucks. And then people are always confused. And it just seems to always go back and forth between those two extremes. It never feels as though somebody picks it up and they're like, oh yeah, okay. I mean, yeah, it was pretty good. It doesn't, at least from what I've seen, I find it tends to bring out more extreme feelings in people. I did enjoy it. I wonder how I would feel if I were to reread it. I do feel that it pulled from something somewhat familiar and then simultaneously impacted fantasy and science fiction, interestingly enough. I know a lot of people have made this comparison, myself included, but I do feel like there's a lot of parallels between it and The Will of the Many. For some people, The Will of the Many is an improvement on Red Rising. For some, it's too similar, and that actually brings things down for The Will of the Many. I think that they have their differences. Red Rising is quite, it starts kind of small, and then I do feel that it gets better as a whole across the trilogy. For me, the third one was my favorite, and the second one, I think a lot of people really feel that that's when things kick off and get way better. But for me, the second one actually had some aspects to it that I didn't like as much. I feel the way in which some of the reveals were done were actually not as fully formed as I would have preferred, and I think all the emotional beats, which is what made this a trilogy that I actually ended up really loving by the end of it, I feel a lot of those things are present in the third book. However, if you pick up the first one and you're like, I don't really like it, I understand. It's not one, I'm not going to die on any hill acting as though somehow you've caused some great offense to me by not liking Red Rising. I understand why it's not for everybody, but I did enjoy it. After that, we have First Law. I think in the past, I don't know, I'm just going to be blunt. I love, and spoiler alert, the Age of Madness, the continuation trilogy, is in the top tier. And I think that my love of that has kind of retroactively made me love First Law even more. I already liked First Law, but I did have some things about it that I was a little bit picky about. I think I did find certain aspects of how he plotted within Age of Madness, and because it's a continuation and the time period is close enough together that you see characters from the original within the continuation series, it sort of felt more connected. It felt like it was building upon, as opposed to feeling like distinctly different things, which in turn is part of why I feel that my feelings are now impacted in reverse. So First Law, I did always like it though. I feel like the way I'm articulating myself right now, it comes across as though I'm saying I didn't really like it before and now I do, which isn't true. I've always liked the First Law trilogy. And I do feel that Abercrombie is just so good at writing realistic feeling characters and also capturing feelings that are not necessarily things that I see represented in a lot of my fantasy stories. So I just think he has a gift. And I haven't found anything else like Abercrombie. If you have anything else like Abercrombie, feel free to leave those recommendations, because I have some that are maybe kind of sorta. If you like this, try that, but I'm happy to hear other suggestions. Next up, we have one of the only young adult series on this list, which would be the Six of Crows duology. And I did quite enjoy this. I do think that when it was first reaching its height of popularity on Booktube, the way it was being discussed, I think it was one of those things where if you heard about it but you hadn't checked it out yet, I could very much see your expectations being far too high, because people were speaking of it as if it were the greatest thing that they had ever read. And maybe for some people it was, but I do find that, like a lot of things, if it gets so incredibly hyped, there's just no way you can go into it and actually have the story meet the expectations that it feels Booktube maybe has put onto it. So I could absolutely see this. I could 100% see this being something that other people felt actually disappointed by. I think I came to it, when I first started it, I think I might have DNF'd it, if I'm remembering correctly. I think I DNF'd it and then I gave it another go. Or I read the whole thing and then I reread the first one and then read Crooked Kingdom. I'm forgetting exactly what happened, but I think I had started it and that sort of was the feeling, and I was like, you know what, I have too much of everyone else's thoughts impacting my reading experience, so I need to try this again. And then I liked it so much more after that. And I do think one of the criticisms that gets launched at this that I think is completely accurate and fair is that you do have to somewhat suspend disbelief and imagine these characters to be a little bit older, which is in no way trying to imply that young people aren't extremely capable and intelligent. It's just that they behave like 45-year-olds who have been like running the streets and crime for years. And you're like, I mean, they're teenagers, you know. I do think it's fair to say, like, it's kind of unbelievable how old these characters are supposed to be. But I feel the way that the character development is done for every single character within this, which there are a number of them, to do it extremely well, which I felt it did, and to have a fun, compelling plot, to have lighthearted moments and heavier moments, and to accomplish all of that within just a duology, I thought was quite the feat. Plus, I like the way that she expanded on her world. As I was saying before, I can be picky about continuations, and I feel like Six of Crows is one of the best examples of a continuation done well. I'm going to go through the next few within the second tier a little bit quicker, but I'm going to say for the next one, we have two that kind of get lumped together within cozy recommendations, and that would be Murderbot, of all things, and Legends and Lattes. Murderbot, I feel, sometimes gets listed as cozy simply because it represents such an everyday feeling, which is kind of like, people suck, my boss sucks, corporations suck, isn't life frustrating, I'm depressed. It's kind of capturing a lot of what people feel, and in a way that we don't see as often in science fiction and fantasy. But I actually feel like it is really quite funny, and I do get the hype for it. That said, I completely understand if people come to it and they're like, because some of the installments actually are just sort of middle of the road for me, and then the moments and the entries that do stand out, I think, are phenomenal. So it can be kind of hit or miss for me even, but the moments that hit, I like so much that I felt I had to have it in this second tier. I quite like Murderbot. And then with Legends and Lattes, I was a little on the fence. When I first picked it up, I was thinking, I don't know if this is going to be as cozy as everybody says. I think that I have a hard time thinking the whole idea of high fantasy, low stakes is really going to be appealing to me, and I was completely wrong, and I was happy to have been proven wrong by this. I thought that the atmosphere was captured really well. I really did feel so strongly for the character, and I do feel that Travis Baldree has sort of helped facilitate the emerging subgenre that is almost, it feels, a genre in itself now in cozy fantasy. So I did quite like this one, and I am I think, in the bandwagon for it. And then last for this, which is not considered cozy fantasy at all, it's epic fantasy, we have the Bloodsworn series by John Gwynne. It's my last one for the second tier. I have thoroughly enjoyed the first 2 books. I like the setting. I enjoy the characters. The characters I don't like, I enjoy how much I despise them. I like the world building. I just have thoroughly enjoyed this. It's just not quite on the same level of love as the ones I have in the top tier, but I do really like this, and I can't wait. I can't wait for the final installment of this series. But with all that said, we'll now jump into the bottom tier and the top tier. So bottom tier, if you have seen my thoughts on these in the past, I don't think these will actually be all that surprising, but as always, in talking about things that, you know, you might really thoroughly love that I didn't, I really truly don't mean to put down the things that you like. They just didn't work for me. And the 3 that I have in this tier would be Rage of Dragons. I'll just go ahead and give my quick answer as to why, which is that Tao is so stupid. The main character in this is, I should clarify. He is extremely determined and driven, which I like in a character. And I even like when that character, when their motivations have them somewhat spiraling, and then we're examining the ways in which they can become reckless as a result of this constant pursuit of what they're going for, which in his instance happens to be revenge. However, if the character is extremely reckless to a point where they're causing so much harm to other people, I really have a hard time, 1, rooting for them, and 2, I don't understand when they don't recognize or even have moments of introspection. It drives me up a wall, and I think part of it is just that so many of us in our day-to-day lives have encountered people, which maybe not to the extreme degree like Tao, but or maybe the repercussions of their recklessness aren't the same. But regardless, there are so many people throughout life that you're like, how are you not even a little bit looking inward and taking any accountability? How are you not realizing you're negatively affecting other people's lives? And sometimes it can be an interpersonal thing with somebody you know, and sometimes it elevates itself up to positions of power, and you're like, well, people suck, and it's because, you know, and I have a hard time with characters like that. Plus, there's the whole, like, Leroy Jenkins scene in that book that is so annoying. Anyway, so Tao frustrates me. That's why this is here. Next up, we have Malazan, and I think I've actually in some ways already made clear why Malazan doesn't work for me in describing the things that are negatives for some of the other stories. So, for example, with Grace of Kings, I was talking about the idea of that feeling of sometimes you're with the gods, and in order to capture that feeling, the way in which the story is presented to you has to be on a scale that is beyond epic, and I don't actually love that. I do enjoy the lore feeling really epic, the setting itself feeling really epic, and I like it feeling as though something has been lived in and has existed for a long time, and there's a lot to discover. I just don't like it being to a point where it feels like there's such an extreme distance. And when we do get moments with the characters and those feelings of introspection, which I like, I personally feel as though it becomes a little bit more author insert than I prefer. It doesn't feel as much like the characters stand out in ways that I connect with. I know a lot of people have really wonderful experiences, not just reading the series, but rereading the series. And I do feel that as a result, it's part of why, I mean, all of you, I think, know that I recommend things even if they don't work for me. I think one of the only examples of a reason I wouldn't recommend something is if the book I feel is way too similar to something else to a point where it just feels like fan fiction. That's one of the examples. But my point in bringing this up is just to say I know that this provides a reading experience that is unlike pretty much any other. And for that reason, I do still recommend it for people. For me, though, that experience just wasn't fulfilling. And then the last one, which for some reason in my head, the last one for this bottom tier feels like the most controversial because I find there's pretty much nobody else. Because at least with Malazan, the people that love it really love it, but there are plenty of people that are like, oh yeah, it didn't really work for me. But this next one, I feel so alone, and I'm also so confused. And that would be Guns of the Dawn. I shouldn't say I don't understand, because there are aspects to the story that I 100% can see as positives. I do feel that there's a lot of effort put in to try and show the effects of war and propaganda. And I do enjoy those themes. I didn't really enjoy how they were executed, but I also, on top of that, think that the main character, this is one of the things that confuses me. People talk about how she's such a compelling character, she's so rootable, and I'm like, she's dumb. And her love interest in the story, it's like, do you like men that hold your family's fate in the palm of their hands? He's not a good guy. So when people are like, I love the romance, I'm like, how? I can't really talk about why without getting into spoilers. I did do a spoiler video for this one. Their dynamic is not rootable, even a little bit to me. Not even a little bit to me. It's so confusing to me, because I do feel like there are a lot of people that one of the tropes that a lot of people don't like about fantasy romance that is really pushed a lot is that, like, alpha male, just moody, brooding character, and there's like this hate to love sort of feeling that people are like, I'm tired of seeing that. It feels like it's in every other popular fantasy romance. And this guy is kind of like that, but I mean, almost worse. I really don't understand. But getting back to the character of Emily, our main character, to me, she does not come across as extremely capable and intelligent. I think that the book does two things that irritate me. One is that they come up with scenarios that are incredibly easy outs, that it's like we had to make everybody else so profoundly stupid to make this character appear smart in comparison. Why am I spending so much time when so many people love this? So I don't love that, because I'm like, can you write them actually seeming clever instead of everybody else being a complete moron? And then second, her ability to persevere, a lot of it comes down to, let's have weird, cartoonishly villainous characters attempt to assault her multiple times throughout the book, and then have no commentary on it pretty much at all. She basically doesn't think about it whatsoever. I'm not saying that the book is offensive. I don't mean that whatsoever. I just mean I don't understand the hype. And I'm super happy so many people like it. I feel bad because I have friends that really like this. One of my friends who really, really likes it. I was so excited because when I had checked the book out from the library, I sent her a picture and I was like, look what I'm reading. And then when I posted my spoiler review, she's like, oh no, it's 45 minutes long. And I was like, I know, I'm so sorry. So I am sorry, not just to my friends, but to all of you who love it. I don't like it. I didn't like it. But I do want to say, I do appreciate the themes. I just think it's hard to, I mean, some of those themes are present in something like Sword of Kaigen, and Sword of Kaigen I thought did those themes so well. Sword of Kaigen has a bumpy start, but the themes are fantastic, but also there are scenes in that are just, they sit with you like nothing else. And I just don't feel like Guns of the Dawn, I don't know, it just didn't work for me. I probably should just leave it at that. Anyway, that's the end of the bottom tier, now up to the top tier. We already talked about Age of Madness, and I've also, this year, talked about it so much, so I probably don't need to continue on. I also gushed about Abercrombie's writing earlier, so I don't know if there's anything else to add. I just love it. And I love the brutal nature of society in it, in a way that it feels realistic, and the bluntness and bleakness. I just feel that he does grimdark so extremely well without leaning into edgy territory. I think it's phenomenal. I love Age of Madness. I also did a non-spoiler review for the series, and then also spoiler discussion, so if you're interested, you can check those out. And then I have, this is not a surprise, I have Stormlight Archive and Mistborn up here. The mental health representation in Stormlight Archive is phenomenal. I've never really seen something like the way Kaladin's, so many people love Kaladin for the exact same reason. I've just never seen anything like it, and the story is also incredibly compelling. It's not just that character, just to be clear. That's just my favorite one. But I also, what I was saying about Bloodsworn, I can't wait for the conclusion to this series, although I'm so scared. Oh my gosh, I am terrified. I did do a fun predictions video if you end up seeing this before Wind and Truth is out, over on my collaborative channel where all of the AdSense revenue goes to charity. So if you're interested in seeing some theories and predictions and having fun reacting to those, then I'll have that linked. It was such a fun video. But anyway, back to why I love Stormlight Archive and Mistborn. I just think that the world is incredible, the magic is incredible, the character development, mental health representation, the here comes the cavalry moments. Oh, it's all so good. Mistborn, there's so many other, I mean, I loved the politicking in the second book. I loved the twists and turns throughout the series. I loved Vin's personal journey, Sazed's journey throughout the story. I love the way in which the sort of uprising was done in this story, and then like picking up the pieces. I love it. And I am one of those people that is on the bandwagon for both of those series. And then last for the top tier, I feel like this one hasn't been considered a BookTube darling in a long time, and I don't know if it's because this author hasn't had something new in a while, but Strange the Dreamer. I love Strange the Dreamer. I love how creative it is. I will say I'm not normally a fan of extremely purple prose, which Laini Taylor does have, but I did like the writing. I thought it was so lyrical and beautiful and creative, just like the setting itself. I liked our characters in this. There are not too many other stories that have made me feel more compassion toward the villains, you could say, but I think the only thing that's even come close in recent years, unless I'm probably forgetting something, but I've been watching Attack on Titan, and I can't really talk about who, but there is a character that for a while I was like, man, are you serious? And then when you see why they have the motivations they do, you're like, oh, okay, you are serious, and I understand now why you are. But if you're interested in Attack on Titan content, I'll have my playlist linked. It's over on a different channel than this one, and it's different than my collaborative channel. But regardless, the villain origin, you could say, or the way in which people, kind of mental health representation as well, how trauma can impact a person, I just think it is done phenomenally in Strange the Dreamer. I really like that duology, and I just really want more Laini Taylor works. But anyway, that's it for a tier ranking of some BookTube darlings. I'm very curious, what are your thoughts on not just these, but what are some other works that you've seen that it just feels like you're the odd man out, either because well, the only way you'd be the odd man out in this scenario is if you didn't like something it feels like the rest of BookTube loves. But what are some other instances where you're 100% with everybody and you are not the odd man out? But anyway, thanks so much for watching. If I have more in-depth reviews for any of these, I will have them linked. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.